everyone. I'm Pallavi and I'm a senior information architect working out of India Studio. My job usually entails humanizing technology and trying to understand the user better and hence designing products for them. So we're here for another session and I'm excited and I hope so are you. So let's begin with a citation from a paper which talks about the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. So it states that crisis is not the event itself, but rather an individual's perception of and response to the situation. Not all traumas result in someone entering a state of crisis. So we know that crisis brings a lot of pain with it. It could be financial pain, it could be an emotional pain, it could be physical pain. But we've also seen some good examples of the outcomes of some of the crises. And one of those is the space race. So the world wars have been one of the most devastating events in the history of mankind. But one good thing that has come out of it is the space race. It gave us the opportunity to go beyond what we've seen and basically try and explore infinity. The other example is of Bitcoin. So after the 2008 financial crisis, people were not allowed to even take out cash from their own bank account, which led people to think about a new form of currency which was more democratic in nature. And they came up with cryptocurrency. And we know that it has opened up so many new ventures for us. So welcome to the talk. And today we'll be talking about design for crisis resurgence. We'll talk about the user behavior change during those times and how products and companies have responded towards them. We'll start by discussing a little bit about what a crisis is and the type of crisis that we'll be discussing today. We'll also look at some of the experience design elements so that we can see those crisis examples from the lens of design. And then we'll move on to discussing about the examples. And during those discussions, we'll talk about the user behavior change, the response by the product or the company, the time at which the response was out, and the type of crisis it was. And then finally, we'll try and take out some of the findings from those examples. So starting from what a crisis is. So Kathleen Fern Banks, in her book called Crisis Communication, states that a crisis is a major occurrence with a potentially negative outcome, affecting organizations, companies, industry, their products, services, and even their name. It basically interrupts the normal business transactions, and it can even sometimes threaten the existence of the organization. So there are different types of crisis, but for today's discussion, we'll keep it to three. We'll discuss about financial crisis. We'll take an example of political crisis. We'll also talk about an example from the natural crisis. So in order to see these examples from a design lens, we need to have a lens in the first place. So Jesse James Garrett's framework about user experience design will be our lens to do so. So it says that there are 5 elements of user experience design from strategy to surface. So the first one is strategy, which talks about why the product exists and who are we making this for. The second one is scope, which talks about the functional requirements needed to achieve those strategic goals. The third is structure, which talks about how the user will interact with the product. The fourth is skeleton. It is the visual representative of all the elements that we've decided to put into the product. And the final one is surface, which is basically the sum total of all the decisions that we've made and the final representation of it. So it talks about imagery, it talks about colors, it talks about typography, etc. Now what we'll do is we'll take one example of each of these elements so that we're not stuck with just one kind of example. So we'll start with the case examples. And the first example is of a strategy design, which is basically the reason for the product. And for this, we have Netflix, or shall I say Quickster. So the year was 2011, and we were still in the shadows of the financial crisis of 2008. and the spending power of people had gone down. And at that time, Netflix decided to split itself into two parts. One was Quickster, which was the unlimited DVD rental service, and the other one was Netflix. And people were not really happy about it because they had not really come out from the devastations of the financial crisis. And this resulted in 800,000 subscriber loss for Netflix. Now, this is a great example of why we need to be sensitive about user needs and their conditions. This decision was taken around 3 years after the peak of the crisis, but yet the behavior had lingered, and this had an effect on Netflix's decision. So it's very necessary that we go back, even after years of the crisis, to check where users stand. The next example is scope, which defines the functional and the content requirement of the product. And for this, we have Telegram. So the event is the Hong Kong protests of 2019, which are still going on. And during this time, people started using platforms, applications, products, which had a very high security and privacy policy. And Telegram was one of them. But the government found out a loophole to identify people in protest groups organized on Telegram, and they took on hundreds and thousands of people under arrest. But Telegram, standing true to its value, it decided to resolve this issue and protect the identity of the Hong Kong protesters. Now, in a political crisis, it becomes really very difficult for a company or a product to take a particular stand, and a lot of companies try and not be involved in it. But what do you do when a product or a company has already been involved by its users? So, this is where the values of the product or company come into play, and it makes the decision of what the product will look like or what the product's function will be. The next one is structure, which defines how the user will interact with the product. And for this, we have Uber with us. So the event that we're talking about here is the global pandemic due to COVID-19, and everybody has a fear of being contaminated, and they want to stay away from each other. So how does a ride sharing app makes sure that everybody who uses that service is safe? So for this case, Uber decided to introduce an extra step of conscious confirmation from its users. So from the first look, it feels like it's just an additional step which has been added. But for how many times in the past 2 or 1 month that I've taken Uber, this particular step has been really useful, and it has never made me forget about carrying my mask or sanitizing my hands. So I vouch for this intervention. The next one is skeleton, which talks about the presentation and the arrangement of all the elements. For this, we have Swiggy with us, which is a food delivery service. And it's again the season of global pandemic, and people want to be away from each other, and they're not really going to restaurants. So how does a food delivery app build trust with its users? Now, Swiggy has a lot of initiatives which they've introduced, but one thing that I want to talk about today is the way they've introduced several communication points on their interface. So if you look on the application's interface, you'll find different points at which they communicate the safety standards. On the first page, you see that point. On each and every card of the restaurant, you'll see a particular tag which says it's the best safety restaurant. And it has a complete set of restaurants which is solely dedicated to the restaurants which follow the best safety standards. And even if you go inside a particular restaurant, you will see very prominently stating that this follows the best standards. So wherever and however it was possible for them to introduce this safety communication to their users, they've done so, and they try to build trust through their interface. The next one is surface, which is how the product will look like. And for this, we have Airbnb to the rescue. So, Airbnb introduced online experiences very early on in the pandemic's timeline. And this decision was a strategic decision for sure. But what I want to bring to your notice is how this decision was implemented. So they so when you go on Airbnb's landing page, you will see the whole landing page dedicated to online experiences right now, and they're not at all subtle about it. They've completely changed their graphics on the landing page. You will see each and every fold in the page dedicatedly having graphics about the online experiences. So it has helped Airbnb to make perceptions about what they're doing right now, and it certainly feels like this is what they've always been doing. So we've come to the end of all the examples, and even though these were few in numbers, there are definitely something that we can take back. And we've seen that responses can vary from surface to strategy across all design elements, as long as it addresses your users' needs. We've also seen that a company's value plays a very important part when it comes to shaping the product, as in the case of Telegram. And we've also seen that interfaces can help build trust, perception, and also ingrain behavior in a very short period of time. And lastly, we've seen that behavior change lingers. So it is very, very necessary that after a crisis, we check back with our users at what stage they are and if they're ready for any change, or else be ready to lose 800,000 subscribers. So thank you so much. You've been a nice audience. I liked presenting this very much. Thank you.